This is one of those times I'm sitting up here and I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Because these guys are innovators in the industry. This is either the people with the unique innovation that they're offering to the healthcare industry, or they have an AI platform, or they're the financing behind those kind of unique special opportunities within a healthcare system. And Cheryl Morgan has a history of kind of going out there and trying these things. You know, heck, we put in brick and mortar pharmacies and clinics. You know, that's going out there. But also we've worked with medical devices in the past and had them put in our clinics for testing and stuff like that. In fact, Mike Molyneux of Symbol is partnering with us to test another new device for a skin cancer detection. And so that's why we always want to hear what's going on in the universe that you otherwise wouldn't hear about. So these gentlemen here, I'm going to have them introduce themselves briefly, and then I'm going to come back to them and have them talk about each individually what they're doing and what innovations they're looking for and what they see in the future. But having said that, go ahead.
So hi everyone, my name is Owen Willis. I'm the founder and general partner of Opal Ventures. Opal Ventures is a pre-seed healthcare venture fund, and we are backing what I would describe as the next generation of healthcare infrastructure. So that's across payers, providers, and pharma, and really it's about how do we deliver better care at lower cost to as many patients as possible.
Good. It's on.
Hi, Steve Levy. I'm a partner at a firm called Unorthodox Ventures. We're based largely in Austin, Texas. I'm personally based in New York, and we have some folks on the ground in Israel. We seek out innovations in the healthcare space, primarily with medical devices, and we'll be happy to share some of those devices with you, which hopefully can be incorporated into what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm Dave Kariakis. I want to say thank you to Alberto for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be up here, and to Cheryl Morgan for allowing us to speak on this topic. I'm based here in Cincinnati, and I got to say, this is about 10 years to the day I was in here getting married, and so it's a little uncomfortable being under lights sober, as I've learned in this room. But I'm a managing partner with Wyndham Capital Partners. Been investing in healthcare for 14 years now. Most recently, I helped run the investment arm and innovation arm for Providence St. Joseph, the third largest nonprofit based in Seattle. And Wyndham has been around for 18 years. We invest in devices, software, digital health, and then uniquely the convergence that we're seeing between the two. I personally come from a family of 20 physicians, nurses, scientists, and so spent a lifetime in healthcare, mostly on the provider side. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Rashad, and I'm a physician from Canada. It's really interesting being here, seeing all the innovation happening, but also these terms that I am not too familiar with, like prior authorization, which we don't really have. In my 8 years of practice, I may have done one prior auth. And in a single payer system, what the government pays us is what we build. There's no room for negotiation, and it's mandated by the Constitution. So it's really fascinating being here and seeing how the system works down here. I wear 4 hats. I'm part-time clinical. I am leading clinical growth for Pocket Pills, which is Canada's largest online pharmacy. We're getting into telehealth verticals. We just signed a deal with Novo Nordisk, as of today was announced. I'm also launching my own startup in the food tracking, glycemic index, glucose tracking space. And then I also run Health Tech Investors. I'm a founding partner there. We're an angel syndicate, 700 physicians, pre-seed stage, 100K check sizes in startups in healthcare.
Hi everybody, my name is Scott Stever. I'm a vice president at River Cities Capital, or RC Capital. We're actually located just about a couple blocks down the road here, right here in Cincinnati. Thanks again to Cheryl Morgan for inviting us here. As I'm sure we're all here to discuss. It's a very exciting time for employer healthcare, as we all know. There's a lot of shift going on in the policy landscape as well as the technology landscape, and it's important for all of us, I think, to just continue to stay abreast of it and you know, really just learn from you all as well. So.
Hi, I'm Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter, which I started about 10 years ago. It's a healthcare incubator based in Chicago. We have incubated 1,000 healthcare startups since we started that have raised about $5 billion now from people like this. We also run startup accelerators, which we can talk about. They're very focused on specific topics that are relevant to people like you in the room. And it was just saying to Mark earlier, I think just based on all the conversations I've had so far today, I think that you all in this room and Cheryl Morgan have a really interesting opportunity to innovate more rapidly and more effectively than a lot of the kind of very larger institutional players, and look forward to talking more about that. I also, before this, I spent about 4 years at a venture firm before I started Matter.
Thank you, gentlemen. And these guys get access to data and gaps in care. They see where certain technologies and venues aren't cooperating or working together. And then they get to decide what kind of, what is that worth, put some money behind it, or put their ideas and their energies behind it. So what I want to do is we're just going to go down, start with Stephen out at the end down there, and start with you. And we're just going to let them talk about what they're doing that's going to be changing, what they feel is going to come next in the area of healthcare. What's the innovations that we'll be talking about at a future conference when you come? So go ahead and take a few minutes and just tell us what you think is coming.
I think I'll maybe focus on one company as a story that I think is illustrative of both the biggest problems in healthcare and also the opportunity for the people in this room. So generally one of the most interesting areas of healthcare that I think is the ability to collect data in different and novel and non-invasive ways from people, analyze it, and then deliver insights that allow for more efficient and more optimized care. And as the technology evolves, that sort of loop can be done more efficiently and more effectively. So the story I'm going to tell is a company that started a number of years ago by a gastroenterologist who treated a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel disease, and he got very frustrated that his patients would end up in the hospital and he'd have no visibility to their deterioration. And so he wanted to build a system that would keep in touch with his patients over time rather than only interacting with them episodically when they would show up in the office. He built it. The system was very simple. You'd send a text message to his patients. About 85% would respond every single time with 5 little questions. And he had built this whole analytics system and this analytics tool that would then stratify his entire patient panel into, and the ones who were most likely to deteriorate in the near future would bubble up to the top, and then his office would reach out and have a conversation. Ran a study with a huge health insurance company of 300 or 400 patients, and the ones who were using his tools saw a 50% reduction in hospitalizations and surgeries. Drug use went up because they were more tightly managed, and so they stepped through the therapies more rapidly. Overall cost of care went down 25 or 30%. As you said, great, I'm going to go out now. I've proven it. I've got the ROI. It benefits everyone except the surgeries, people who are benefiting from the surgery. And just ran into wall after wall after wall because providers aren't going to pay for it because the ROI isn't there for them. The large health insurance companies were theoretically interested, but when it came down to it, they weren't interested in investing the time or the energy or the resources to implement it. And the company's still alive, it's still going, it's making very slow progress. I think it's, and then circling back to what I was saying a minute ago, it's the kinds of people and relationships in this room that I think can take solutions like this and come up with innovative ways to implement them. It clearly reduces costs. Patients really very much like it, but it doesn't fit into the typical kind of VUCA construct of how healthcare works. And we see solution after solution after solution like this that, given the complexity and the weirdness of how the economics of healthcare work in, maybe not in Canada, but in the United States, and so hopefully there's more of these kinds of solutions that you all can consider and work together on.
I think it's a perfect example of what's available now that wasn't available 10 to 15 years ago. And across both technology and policy, we're at sort of an era now where there's an incredible increase in the data possible. It doesn't mean it's the easiest data to now absorb and the easiest data to consume nor obtain in a very transmissible way. But that being said, there's more solutions now. We as investors, I think a lot of us look we live in data, and we look at data and we evaluate based on data, and it's now more than ever, you can look at real hard data to look at ROI, and that's something that is blossoming in the employer space, both self-insured and fully insured as well. We invested in a company called Modify Health. Modify is a foodist medicine and dietitian provider to address common illnesses such as diabetes, hypertension, as well as behavioral things, IBS, GI, and a whole slew of others. And what they were able to do is really drive at what was formerly, sort of a believe me type solution, which is, hey, dietitians and diet really drives clinical outcomes and financial outcomes to both employees and the whole healthcare system. With the advent of technology and with the collaboration with plans, with collaboration with employers, they've been able to drive now real clinical studies that they can then use to expand their solution to more employers. And it's been able to expand through the claims data and looking at things that are less easy to do, like behavioral or like employee satisfaction and retention. And so the advent of this data is almost crucial and has to be in the ethos with a lot of these solutions, because that's how they grow and that's how they demonstrate their ROI to their customers. They continue to grow. Now they're focused on GLP-1 avoidance as well, which is a big topic of conversation, just specifically within the obesity space. I realize there's many other spaces within that. And they're really able to demonstrate this because of this shared collaboration with the employers, with the plans, exactly what the ROI is, and then they can quantify exactly what they're doing. Not to mention that it's been helpful with employee retention, which is always something that's underspoken. So, it's a great one for us.
So I'll give our overarching framework first, which is the goal of healthcare should be to provide world-class quality healthcare and for it to be ubiquitous and easily accessible. So we think quite a bit about equity and equality in healthcare, and we look for startups that are bridging the gap and providing a solution which empowers patients and engages them into their own care. I think we are seeing a shift in the patient demographic where patients are more open to taking on more of their own care personally. And obviously AI is unlocking a lot of this shift. We're just investing in a company called Meru Health, which is doing this in the B2B, in the employer health, mental health space. So similar to Spring, the difference being they are teaching people the tools to manage their own anxiety through a biofeedback loop and through their digital solution. I know after a pair, the digital therapeutic space has seen a big downturn, but we kind of remain bullish on digital therapeutics because it's a more streamlined way to teach patients how to take care of their own health. I think with AI, we are very bullish in AI agents, on physician clones. If you have a favorite physician, we have the technology now for that physician or that provider or that NP or that nurse to clone themselves and provide access to their digital clone to their patients 24/7. I think we haven't iterated on the interface of how we interact with technology for over 30 years. We still use a screen, a mouse, and a keyboard. I always say that the ideal patient interaction with a physician or a provider does not have a keyboard or a mouse in the room, and ideally doesn't have a screen in the room. So we are looking for, because we're pre-seed and small check sizes, we really need very big outcomes for our portfolio model to work. So we're always looking for companies that are bringing the next technological revolution, and I think it will not involve apps or screens. It will be calling patients directly or text messaging through AI agents. And that's kind of our framework of investing and what we're most excited about.
So it's a broad question. We've gotten a variety of different answers, and I'll take the step of coming up a level. So we spend $4.7 trillion in U.S. healthcare spend. That's the third largest global economy in and of itself. Yet, all of us have visited the provider, and it's far from the most efficient experience. And I come back to, and it's still within the last 10 years, so 8 years ago, McKinsey did a study of the digitization of industry, so a measure of progress, if you will. Healthcare was third to last. It was behind government, and if you've ever been to the DMV, and I knocked the DMV, but I just went, and it actually was a lot easier than that, going to see my primary care doc. But healthcare was ahead of agriculture and hunting. and I'd argue ag tech, just because it has a name that's really cool called ag tech, surpassed healthcare. So the fact that I ran and was involved in a 180-year-old faith-based nonprofit as a venture capitalist, investing in innovation. I was hired by a gentleman, an executive who ran Kindle for Amazon, stepped into the healthcare world to help digitize, help address that issue, has since left to go back to run Amazon Healthcare as a means of, I'm sure, frustration with nonprofit healthcare. But this age of, this is the way it's always been done, no longer works, right? It's roughly 20% of our GDP and growing, and it's not going to take a point solution. We're in a giant room, all of us, everybody in healthcare, and the room's starting to flood, and there are leaks all throughout. And so if you're not looking at new ways to do things, then we're all in trouble. So, but what's fascinating is in the next 10 years, we're talking about having a colony on Mars. We're talking about not being the smartest, whatever you call AI, being on the planet. And that kind of advancement is happening, right alongside of healthcare. So it's the most exciting time that I've seen to change the most important industry that touches all of us in our most vulnerable state that is desperate for efficiencies and innovation. So I could not be more excited about where we're heading, or at least the prospect. It's also very scary too.
So David kind of lifted things up a little bit at a higher level. I'm going to take you literally into the bowels of things in terms of some of the things we do, and hopefully that'll give you a flavor for at least some of the stuff we look in the world, and hopefully relevant for you. So one of the companies we're investors in is a company called Vibrant. It's a non-pharmacological solution for chronic constipation. So you can't get more in the bowels than that. And it's literally a little capsule pill. You ingest it, and it vibrates, stimulating peristalsis, which helps you move, helps the process by which you move fecal matter. And there's a lot of really interesting things about this, and I think this is a piece of the puzzle for help you guys think about what are opportunity sets in the future. First, I'll say specifically for you guys, this is a product because it's like a drug, but it's really a device. The traditional payer world doesn't know what to do with it because they're square box, square hole sort of folks. And
No offense.
well, not these people aren't. That's the point. This is where innovation has an opportunity. So I'm saying the traditional payer. Yeah, we are offending people. We're happy to do that.
Good recovery. Good
not
recovery.
the folks here. So your private payer compatriots. So they don't really know what to do with a device that is really effectively like a pharmacological solution, but it's a device, and it's hard for them to figure that out. What's interesting about the product though is better efficacy, no chemical interactions with other drugs, no side effects, no real side effects, and happy to share that in conversations if you're interested. And in particular, in one of the topics that was mentioned, because it's a device, we know about compliance. So we know if somebody's actually taken the device, which I think is a huge thing for providers, for payers, for folks like yourselves, where what you're interested in is making sure that your employee population actually is getting served and helped by what they're doing. And so if they're taking the therapy or not. So we think it adds a lot of interesting pieces to the puzzle. The other two things that I'll mention quickly, again, just so you have a feel for where we see things in the world that I think are relevant to this community is we're investors in a company called Lumen. It's a non-regulated, not an FDA device, but you exhale into it. It tells you if you're burning carbohydrates or fat and helps you, and then gives you nutritional recommendations. So think about it as a nutritionist in your pocket. And if you think about for people, and weight, obesity, GLP-1s, all these topics that are so relevant to everything we're talking about today and in general in the healthcare world, we really have one tool that, for I don't know how many years that people use to help manage weight and the related items, which is a scale. And we've had that for however long we've had it. So there's not a lot of tools people have at their avail to try to manage this. And so this is a really interesting way to do it. It's just a way to help people get there. And you mentioned about equality and equity. A lot of people don't have access to a nutritionist. And I was shocked when I had to, had some issues that I personally needed to deal with. And I went to a nutritionist. To me, most of it sounded pretty straightforward, things that I generally knew about before, but there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, don't know that, haven't had access to it, and democratizing that access we think is really interesting. Last thing I'll just, again, is in our portfolio to give you a sense about the mundane things, not the high level, but mundane. We had investment in a company that does ear cleaning. It's a huge problem. Again, not a sexy problem. It's not cancer, it's not cardio, but it's a real problem. And if you have it particularly hits a little bit, probably out of your population, but a little bit older demographic. But it's the type of issue where if you have it, you have to go to an ENT. So ENT doesn't want to do it. They don't get reimbursed well for it, but it costs you guys probably a lot of money to have somebody get their ears cleaned. This is a system that basically has automated the process that an ENT would use. We are actually now in there setting up clinics where we're delivering it. So it's a great opportunity to add really quite easily something that, and I think it would provide significant cost savings for folks like yourselves. So that's a little bit what we're doing in our world. I don't know if it's so exciting, but on a very practical day in, day out basis can really help provide value, better care, and make accessibility to specialty, normally what might be specialty things, to a broader base of the population.
So the benefit of going last is I get to cherry pick all of their best ideas and share them as my own. So for us within healthcare, we're investing very, very early, right? So we're usually the first institutional check in a business. Usually we're working with a founder for 3 to 6 months before we make an investment. And all of our backers in the fund are in healthcare, right? So we are able to introduce these individuals to potential customers, really help us get a sanity check on the credibility of the founder, the efficacy of what they're building. And all of that is really important because building in healthcare is incredibly difficult. It's like being a founder on hard mode, right? You have all of the incentive structures that you have to sell into. The efficacy of these products is just way more important than it would be for a piece of software, right? It's not a widget in an office doing a task. These are things that actually impact people's lives and can be the difference between life and death for a patient. And so making sure that the data is there, the efficacy is there, the credibility of the founders is there is so unbelievably important. But that being said, within healthcare and kind of within where we play, we look at things that are data infrastructure or kind of software infrastructure layers across payers, providers, and pharma. So we are looking quite broadly at the healthcare system. And a couple of the things that we've seen as tailwinds have been, number one, just the explosion in data available, right? The amount of genomic data, just as an example, has increased 100-fold in the last 5 years, and it's looking to increase 100-fold in the next 2 years again, right? So there's a tremendous amount of data available. At the same time, we now, with kind of the advances that have been made with LLMs and AI, we now actually have the means by which to both organize and analyze that data at a cost that is much, much more affordable than it was even a couple years ago. And so what all of that means for us as we're looking at companies is, one, a lot of businesses in healthcare are good businesses, but weren't necessarily, quote unquote, venture backable or venture scale businesses. With the AI tooling, with the advancements in data, there's a much broader array of companies that can use these technologies and AI to operate more efficiently. Maybe they have to hire fewer clinicians. And so there's a much broader array of companies that we can back. And so just to give two very, very quick examples within our portfolio, we invested in a company called Orchestra Health, which is a care transition platform really focused on pre-op. So as the patient is getting ready to go to the OR, this company actually takes over the entire pre-op process from the hospital, and it means that the nurses are able to spend all of their time in the OR, and it means that the patients are much more likely to actually get to their surgeries. And so what that means for these hospitals is about an 80% reduction in costs as it relates to perioperative medicine, but then also a 10% increase in revenue, which is incredibly important, especially for these community hospitals. What's really interesting, though, on the payer side for that business is that they are also doing risk stratification for those patients. And so they actually just signed their first payer agreement with the VA to do risk stratification for all OR visits in Texas for all of the patients that are coming through the VA. This is a company that is 3 years old, right? It's absolutely remarkable what is now possible with technology, with small teams, and so that is kind of one side of the equation. On the other side, we backed a company that does personalized cancer treatment plans. And the way it works is it helps oncologists take the treatment plan that a patient has, bring in all of the patient's personal data, the genomic data, the tumor data, everything, and then it makes recommendations of these are the things that you might want to try adding to the treatment plan to reduce the rate of recurrence of this cancer. It's based on hundreds and hundreds of thousands of publications, and it's something that oncologists want to do for all their patients. They just don't have the time to do it. They're not reimbursed appropriately to do it. And up until this point, it was only available to the very, very wealthy, right? It was something that the richest people in the world got to have, but nobody else did because they were paying for it out of pocket. With all of these advances in AI and kind of all the technology available, they're now able to do it for $250 per patient.
Wow.
And so it is absolutely transformational in terms of how we think about what high quality care can look like for the average patient.
Very good. And the following questions are all to be made up in my head because Alberto didn't give me others, but curiosity is where these will come from. How much does, and anyone can feel free to answer this, does regulation get involved in your situations or hinder you? Or is that a problem in what you all do?
I can start off because actually I was going to say, can I say something that actually ties in perfectly to what you just said? So thanks for that tee up.
Okay.
It's like listening to what everyone's saying. I think, if you go back for most of the last 75 years, technological innovation in healthcare was primarily drugs or medical devices, both of which have very defined pathways to get approval, generate around both the regulatory structure and the payment structure. And what we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years is just an explosion of opportunity created by advances in data and software infrastructure that allows us to do so much more to improve outcomes and improve efficiency, but the structures, the infrastructure, the regulatory infrastructure, the reimbursement infrastructure, the policy layers have not caught up, and they're not moving nearly as fast and evolving nearly as fast as the technologies are. I think Rashad mentioned digital therapeutics, which there's just no reimbursement pathways for that. I mean, you look at some of the data around some of these digital therapeutics, and it should be a no-brainer to implement, but it's more complicated. And so the main basic structure of healthcare doesn't know how to ingest it. You mentioned like a device that looks like a pill. It's the same kind of thing. Like it doesn't fit neatly into a pathway. And so what it is going to take to kind of spark and stimulate more of this stuff are creative individuals in companies and organizations and partnerships and collaborations that are more flexible, which is why I think this is such an interesting forum. Somebody else mentioned generally the concept of where healthcare's going. We've forever, we've had this very episodic, very reactive healthcare system that doesn't do a good job of keeping people healthy. And technology now enables, if it were deployed more freely and more regularly, much more of a predictive and proactive system to keep people healthy. But again, it's going to take different payment mechanisms, different structures, creative thinking in order to get over some of these hurdles and create more of a flywheel to get these things adopted.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think from where I sit, before regulation, we need to figure out liability and reimbursement, and those are the two keys which will unlock adoption of this technology. I don't foresee the regulators catching up to the technological advancements just because they're happening so fast. We're still very nascent in the regulatory framework. We are comfortable now with AI being a black box to an extent, but we're not really comfortable with AI making mistakes. And there is a problem of scale here. If I make a mistake as a physician, I may harm 1 to 10 patients, but if an AI that's being used by millions makes a mistake, it will harm millions of patients. The two types of mistakes AI usually makes, one is called hallucinations, which we can add parameters around to stop those, but another one is called drift, which is where for lack of a better analogy, AI goes drunk, has a few shots of whiskey, and then it doesn't know what to do with it itself, and it'll make mistakes that make no sense to us. So I think once we figure out the liability framework, we are talking about, within circles, about having a mixed liability model where liability somewhat rests on the patient and some on the physician. It's a very uncomfortable conversation because how can you ask someone to take on liability for something where they don't have the knowledge? If I said, if there's a solution, AI solution that flies a plane, when you can offer it for $1 a flight from here to London, but the passengers have some liability, we obviously say, no, that's insane. We should never allow that. But there's a lot of gray area between that and maybe a scooter you take down the road. And I think we have to kind of get into the weeds here to figure out how do we talk about liability, reimbursement, and then regulation should follow that, I think.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think regulation. So we work a little bit later stage with more work on almost securing the adoption and working about and thinking about growth and expanding to the whole U.S. and beyond. And so I'll leave it to my smarter colleagues here to talk about earlier stage regulation and the pits, falls, and everything involved with that. Later stage regulation, I think, is net good. It's sort of like the DMV. It is a net good for society. It's meant to be good, but a lot of times it's hamstrung by human capital. It's hamstrung by process, by bureaucracy. But in its purest form, it's meant to protect citizens, and it's meant to protect the United States and so on and so forth, and just in the best interest of everybody. That being said, when we look at adoption, think about like some easy low-hanging fruit that we're currently trying to address in terms of lowering the overall cost of care, like moving just the sites of care to lower sites or lower cost sites. Certificates of need in certain states and certain state-by-state laws that prevent certain procedures being done outpatient, where in other states it's being done inpatient. Again, done with the best of intentions, and it's making its way through the proper checks and balances. But a lot of this, is done effectively to get a stronger grip on the speed of innovation and the speed of pace to make sure that there's no accidents that happen along the way. And so, I think from an adoption perspective, regulation, while it has its pitfalls and ultimately, is somewhat limited in the same way a lot of other government agencies are, it does try to do the best thing and generally heads in that direction. Although I'm sure, I'm not a government technology investment professional, don't know much about that, but that is certainly a space that could use a lot of innovation to help achieve the same endpoints that they're trying to achieve while accelerating what they're trying to do.
I would just say real quickly, it's not regulatory. The FDA has done a great job in advancing that. It's reimbursement. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more payers practice medicine. And not to their fault, they're asking for more clinical data, which just takes more and more investment on our side. And it just takes longer. So you can do this rigorous clinical study that's enough for the FDA, but not enough for the individual payers. And so an example is we just invested in a device that competes with the standard of care. It's an extremely high volume musculoskeletal condition that many of us have. Right now the standard of care is a 2-hour general anesthesia in hospital, 2-night hospital stay, 6 to 12 month recovery, orthopedic surgery. Patients have died from this. The investment we just made, 4 of the 7 Medicare administrative contractors pay for it. A lot of the VA, a lot of commercial insurers pay for it. It's a 10-minute in-office procedure under local or monitored sedation. Patients are walking that afternoon, 80% pain-free over 18 months, and you can still do this very invasive surgery. It doesn't burn the bridge thereafter. And payers are denying this, and depending on what geography you're in, they are determining how invasive your procedure is to help solve your issue. The only 2 issues, they've done 14,000 procedures. There's 2 adverse events. One patient went skydiving the next day, and the other one went horseback riding. So these are. That's a good question. We could reset that because we could chalk it up to that. But these patients are in severe pain, debilitated, and then they choose to do that shortly after this. So I think it's payers and reimbursement is the largest risk we can take. And I think you all are in a really unique position to buck that and to determine what is best for the patient and take some risk that is not even that risky. It's common sense too. So.
Yeah, I actually want to reiterate David's points, and I think it's such a unique opportunity for the folks in this room because we're not, as a firm, there are some firms that are very mission-driven. We're not, one mission they have, we're going to, save the world, we're going to, change the climate and all that. We're really focused on helping build businesses. The nice thing about doing that in healthcare is inherently there's good that comes out of it, right? Better health is provided, and we kind of like that it's the natural outgrowth of it, but not the driven purpose. And I think for the folks in this room, you guys have a unique opportunity similarly, which is you all have jobs to do and you have to, deliver care as a thing, but and be conscious about costs and how do you do that. But to David's point, the blockers, and I would add one other group, the FDA, ironically, as a government entity, really is trying to get innovation, and they've created all sorts of programs to get new innovative, both diagnostics and in particular therapeutics out into the marketplace as quickly as it can. The other thing, even where they're not doing it, the pathway is pretty well trodden so that for most things you know what you have to do to get there. The payer market is, and I'm talking about traditional commercial payers, is such a mess. You don't know what you have to do. I mean, you kind of, but you don't really know. It's a little bit more arbitrary, capricious. And then, quite frankly, the hospital system, the practitioners themselves usually are pretty good, but not always. The hospitals, you have a CFO making a decision. All he cares about cost, right? Are you going to save me money or not save me money? You got to prove it. Oh, and by the way, yes, of course, we want better efficacy and we want better quality of life results, blah blah blah. But how are you going to save me money? And so those are two critical pain points in the system, and practitioners and your guys, the folks in this room, have an ability to really, again, as the natural play of healthcare in terms of the mission and what it provides in terms of benefits for society. You guys have a real unique opportunity, I think, to help push that in a way that actually services your business, the business criteria you need to hit, but also does some good ancillary to that as well. And it's really to cut out that pain point to the payers in particular. So we'd love to see you guys and doing more and getting proactive about all that.
I would say one thing to add, and this is in defense of payers, is the cost of care just in general is going up dramatically, right? And we look at a lot of these kind of incredible therapeutics and things that are coming to market, especially around gene and cell therapies, and they're coming to market and they're $1 to $3 million per dose. Right? They are just astronomically expensive, so much more expensive than a lot of other, therapies might have been previously. But at the same time, we are now in this place where, as an example, we can potentially cure conditions like sickle cell, right? It's the first time that we've ever been able to say that in human history. And so it puts payers in a really, really tough position. And one of the things that we've been seeing and been really excited about with some of the startups is the innovation of these startups not necessarily being a piece of technology, but the innovation is actually around the business model of making sure care gets delivered, right? So one of the companies in our portfolio is a company called Quilt Health, and what they do is clinical trials matching for sickle cell and rare disorders. And effectively what it means is those patients with sickle cell don't need to rely on their payer to approve these up to $3 million medications. It can be done via a clinical trial, and ideally at a center that is local to the patient, which also brings down costs tremendously. And so those are the sorts of innovations that also become really interesting as we think about how do we navigate this healthcare system in a way that makes sure that we're able to drive access to care for these best-in-class therapeutics. The other thing I'll say, and part of it is because I don't, on my end, deal with a lot of regulatory stuff within our portfolio, is one of the tailwinds that I think that hasn't been mentioned yet, and one of the big challenges, is that there's an incredible mistrust among consumers with the healthcare system as it exists today, right? And I think, everyone in this room is a user of the healthcare system and probably has some experience with the healthcare system that was disappointing or didn't mean that they received the level of care that they expected or thought that they should get. And we are all insiders within healthcare. We understand the healthcare system. It is 10,000 times more difficult for somebody outside of this room to get care in a way that is, they think, to fidelity or to the level that they deserve. And so one of the things that we are seeing a lot of right now is a focus on cash pay among consumers, a push towards more longevity medicine, more functional medicine, things that give patients the feeling that they are able to take control over their own health and potentially drive some of their own health outcomes. And I think it is something that needs to be embraced more by the traditional healthcare system and by payers. Otherwise, it's going to become, I think, a very, very big threat to the industry as it exists today.
Can I ask you, Owen, just on that, and again, for fun, I'll challenge you a little bit, which is, I'd make the argument that the easiest thing people could do if they want to take control of their own health is nutrition. Nutrition and exercise, right? We all know that it's an old sort of thing. Everybody's, if you eat right and you exercise, God forbid you get cancer, you have, but that really will solve most problems. And yet, most people don't do it. We have a horrible, I don't need to tell this room, obesity rates that are outrageous, leads to diabetes, cardiovascular disease, blah, blah, blah. So appreciating your statement conceptually, practically speaking, if what you're saying is right, how do you get people to change? I mean, this is the hardest thing, is changing behavior. And it's it should be relatively easy for the average person to do that, so.
Yeah, I think we see in the national discourse the pendulum swinging back in the other direction. I think, our lives are built around things today that make it actually very difficult to be healthy. And, a lot of the conversation that's happening with, the longevity folks, the, some people who are kind of in the MAHA movement, et cetera, that are getting a lot of national attention right now, the core of it is really about living healthier, right? And I think that what we've seen within kind of, both within startups, but also within kind of individual behavior, is there's an understanding at the very core that our lifestyle today, what we eat, the way we get around, whether we exercise or not, it's not working, right? And I think that is kind of that first step to some of that behavior change. I think also the conversation around GLP-1s leans into that as well, right? That seems like, for many people, a silver bullet to jump-starting that health journey. But yeah, I think overall your point is very well taken, right? It is very it's one thing to say we need to be healthier. It's another thing to actually make those changes, and I think it requires more systemic approaches than just kind of one-off apps that are helping people out.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Tag, you're it.
I'll be quick with this. So I think you guys bring up a really good point here, and you're really both coalescing. It's talking about employers here and talking about employer health. We're coalescing around who has control and where can you drive systemic change here. We're at a really interesting point in history here where the patient has more control over their health. I agree with that, although they may not always be motivated to. But the relationship between the employer and the employee has never been more important. You talk about specifically the relationship with commercial payers. Well, and commercial payers have a lot of power, and we have very little say for what commercial payers can do, especially as just innovators here. But the employer has always been the ultimate, leveler for a lot of health plans. And ultimately the employer is the customer of a lot of these commercial health plans. And now more than ever, with what's going on in Washington, that's pushing, a lot of the administration changes that are pushing a lot of, people to move towards self-insured plans, and just that general trend towards self-insured plans. There's more grip from the employee, from group health plans and so on and so forth. There's more grip from the employee to demand what they want from their employers. Turnover is at a highest rate since COVID. There are really systemic forces that are giving more power to the employee now more than ever, and this is allowing patients to demand what they want. Simultaneously, the employer can also push back. You know, like you said, I mean, these GLP-1s is absolutely a solution. I mean, it's all the rage. Everyone's been talking about it. If you're under an employer-covered plan, the employer has the ability to potentially, you know, you have to weigh the risk versus the benefits in terms of just how you're treating your employees and what you want them to go through. But there is an opportunity for them to sort of create behavior change by just illicit pull-through from the GLP-1 landscape to say, okay, if you want the GLP-1s, here's an avoidance pathway for you all to go through. And if you check X, Y, and Z, then okay, then that makes sense. You've worked your way up the acuity spectrum. And so between just the two dynamics back and forth between the employee and the employer, I think and we've seen this for some of our medical device investments too, specifically with self-insured employers, there's been, you know, what I'll call a grassroots movement to demand changes to their plan, to their care. And that's really created a new evolution of access for these patients. And so, you know, especially just as we think about, you know, adding plan creativity and customization, and, you know, it's sort of just a lot of this data transferability allows an easier shift from fully insured to self-insured for a lot of both mid to large-sized employers, as well as ICHRA and just far more options for the individual. I think we're going to see potentially more flexibility and hopefully, you know, more ability for the employee to grab hold of their health.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
Yeah, our healthcare system makes it as hard as possible for people to stay healthy and to be healthy. It just isn't organized to do that. It's a series of businesses that are all trying to extract margins and all have economic interests that diverge from keeping people healthy and well. And payers are not going to fix that. Providers aren't going to fix that. I think government could fix it, but it's not going to. And so in my mind, the only actor that has the ability to, and the incentive to, and the ability to, and where the economics and the benefits and the outcomes and it all fits together and aligns are self-insured employers, to really be the ones to drive innovation and to fix a lot of the things that we're talking about on this panel. And that isn't just technology. It's also, you know, we know that more primary care equals less specialty care, equals less hospitalizations, equals less costs. We know nutrition and exercise reduce things. There are lots of technology solutions that enable both of those things and a whole variety of other solutions, and hopefully come away from this conversation excited to explore some of these novel solutions and figure out how to kind of lead and implement these things in ways that will improve the health of your populations and your members, and also drive down your costs.
I want to give a few moments for the audience to ask some questions they want to, but it seems to me from these conversations that there are some underlying principles that are being addressed here. One of the most meaningful ones to me that I've always felt is that the payer system, the insurance system, is not a healthcare system, it's a financial system. And so they've got the wrong hat on first. You know, so when we've got a financial system trying to act like it's a healthcare system, that model just isn't going to make it come out right. It's interesting that all the sponsors of the sort of everything that's taking place here today, none of them are traded on Wall Street. They're all closely held organizations and all. And the other thing is that apparently we're the cause of most of our illnesses, you know, and that really you're trying to help us find ways to solve problems that we just caused for ourselves through too much inflammation, predominantly in that space. I mean, every once in a while we feel like we're taking a risk having a panel like this, but every time we do, it's always the most intriguing panel, I think, from the discussion that comes out, because it's so much more philosophical about the way we think about things and do things. And I'm glad to know there's money behind and people behind trying to change the world in a system that really doesn't want to be changed. It really doesn't want to be innovative. It really wants to keep it right where it is right now and all. Well, having said that, any questions for our folks up here? Yes?
regulatory approvals, and it's quickly changing. Probably you saw like a couple days ago, the Doctronic just raised $20 million from the investment led by Lightspeed Ventures. So there are a lot of money going into the AI and doctors field. So I have a question in terms of the like early stage VCs. I know there are like a lot of VCs, they don't have a dry powder, they don't have investments in that field. So what is your vision in terms of the AI doctors? I mean, implementation in the US as just first wave of the AI doctors being funded by big VC funds?
As a physician myself, I think AI should replace me because I'm one of the costlier points. If you track the healthcare finances, I cost a lot of money. And because I go to school for a long time, I pay for the education, and I have high expenses as well, which is my own doing. But anyways, I think an AI physician is the reality of the future. In terms of funding an AI doctor, for you to prove to me that you're going to replace me completely is a very tall ask. Once you get into my decision-making clinical decision tree, it expands into about, there's a company that mapped this out, I think it's about 20,000 different decisions that are made in one general visit if it's more than 60 minutes. And a lot of these decisions are not visible to the patient. So it's a very tall ask from an investor perspective. What might be much easier is an AI doctor for specific verticals. So for hormone replacement, for testosterone, for menopause, these are two spaces we're looking at a lot. And I think there is a bill in the Senate to give an AI a medical license to practice medicine. And if we are bullish on that, and if you are as well, I think that is whoever has a solution in place. We saw this in COVID. So whoever had the telehealth infrastructure in place, whenever a tailwind will emerge, and regular tailwinds are the ones that are arguably the strongest ones. So whenever the state gives a medical license for an AI to practice medicine in any capacity, and you have the data to say, our AI is 100% accurate and hallucinates 1 in 10,000, then you are in the right position. But I think the way to build it is for specific verticals, not a general AI doctor. I can see a lot of money being poured into that. So I don't think AI as an industry is overvalued at all. If anything, it's undervalued. But there are specific companies within the vertical that are overvalued. And the worry is these AI companies that are building these, that are promising, the stars, saying we're going to build a complete AI doctor. I don't see that succeeding with the current LLM technology. Maybe there's a new technology. We have linear regression, we have LLMs, and there's something else coming, I'm assuming, at some point. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what it is. But then maybe we could have an AI doctor, but I don't see that being possible with the current technology.
I'll add in really quickly. I think for an AI doctor, clinical decision making is a kind of an obvious place where AI is going to bring a ton of value. It already is algorithmic in many ways, and so it lines up well there. I do think, though, there's always going to be a place for the relationship between a doctor and patient, right? I think the role of the doctor shifts from kind of clinical decision making more towards what I would describe as account management, right? Of building the relationship with the patient, being the person who is able to deliver good news or bad news. Because we've already seen examples of clinicians, delivering news to patients via like a robot with an iPad, and the patient suing, right? Because whether or not it was the right decision, whether or not the doctor made a mistake, the patient felt like they were mistreated because it was not delivered with care. And so I think that is going to be the shift in terms of how we think about doctors. I think it means also we have to think about transforming the way we train clinicians and how we select for who could be or should be a clinician, right? Because right now we are selecting for, among many other things, ability to pass these incredibly arduous exams and memorize a ton of facts. It's going to shift more towards how do you actually deliver care effectively and build a strong relationship with your patients so you can give them the bad news.
Just really quick, I have a completely different take on this, which is you're never going to have a successful AI doctor until you create a really good AI mother who is outrageously proud of their AI doctor child. So that is the key piece.
All right, I think on that note, maybe one more quick question, let one of you respond, but we should probably close out then. Anybody else, real quick? All right.
I just wanted to add one thing is there are things we value that humans create because humans have created them. So AI can already make beautiful art much better than any human can paint and beautiful music, but we don't value those. No one will go to an AI concert. You want a human there playing the guitar or playing the piano. So maybe the AI doctor analogy is you want a human providing care to you. I think that's an assumption. I don't know if that's true, but that's something to keep in mind.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I think one question. Go ahead.
Okay. This is completely kind of awkward, I guess is the way. I'm a benefits administrator for a city. However, I'm also in the private sector, in technology, in an AI environment, and we are looking for investors. So I would like to find out if any of you are available after this session so I can pitch to you. Because I feel like, holy cow, this is meant to be. I really need to talk to one of you. Or all of you.
Are you only interested in us raw money? Is that what
Does that include me? No. All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.